Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Octopussy.
We move as one. We're an all-time high. We'll change all that's gone before, doing so much more than falling in love.
Though I've always thought it was highly regarded, it turns out this one's pretty divisive. Rocking 42% on Rotten Tomatoes, it's safe to say this might be seen as a dud. However, I've always enjoyed the film and have been anticipating coming back to it. Throughout this video, we'll be going through it all and pointing out all the Fabergé Easter eggs and things you might have missed. We'll also be discussing the stories that inspired it, and I can't wait to get into the movie. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Octopussy. Now Octopussy kicks off our first in the Battle of the Bonds, with the second being Never Say Never Again. I'll talk about the making of that next time, but there was a fierce rivalry between Ian and Kevin McClure. United Artists had made money on For Your Eyes Only, and this recouped some of the losses that they'd had on Heaven's Gate. So they decided to greenlight another Bond, and within a month they were purchased by MGM. MGM have of course held the rights ever since, and though they themselves have been purchased, it became the home for Bond. But this is the first Bond film where the line appears at the start. Now the wheels started turning very early on with this picture because the team were desperate to beat McClure. Thunderball had been the biggest Bond movie ever made, and you can see why they'd be sweating over a remake, especially with Sean Connery reprising the role. Owning Fleming's back catalogue had provided some advantages though. Writer Richard Maybaum got together with Michael G. Wilson and they pored over the stories that remained. This included Octopussy and the Living Daylights, which collected a number of short stories. This also included The Property of a Lady, which somewhat plays into the Fabergé egg. Though Octopussy itself isn't necessarily adapted, they do take elements from it, and we'll talk about that later. George MacDonald Fraser was also brought in to help with the script as well, and he'd done extensive research on India due to his novel Flashman. Initially though, the team suggested Bond go to Japan, with that appearing in You Only Live Twice. But Fraser felt India would provide ample ammo for where to set the movie and provide a brand new playground for Bond to go to. Now the film was initially going to open on the Isle of Man and have a motorbike chase, but Cubby nixed this, and thus they reworked it to be the minijet scene, which was an idea they'd already developed for the previous movie. Now, we have spoken a fair bit about how Moore was out of contract, and for every new film he wanted more.
How do you like it? How do you like it?
Thus the producers were looking for new actors, with James Brolin getting pretty close to snaring it. If you've seen some of the screen tests, then you might have actually had like a Mandela effect when you see him walking around with BJ. He also read the scene from Russia with Love with Maud Adams, which at this point is pretty much the go-to to test new actors. There was also an action scene as well, and all in all, Brolin seemed to tick every box across the board. Well, except for being American, but they were like, can you do a British accent? Beyond that though, Brolin was what they were looking for, and he actually said he'd been officially hired and was getting things in place to move to London. However, the producers got really spooked by McClure. You have to realise that to the casual audience, they had no idea about the Wright's nightmare. A Wrightmare, if you will. To them, they were just seeing two Bond movies in the same year, and to the casual person, Sean Connery was James Bond still. Cubby was really annoyed that Sean had gone with McClure as well, and he'd seen firsthand how he was kind of the golden goose for the franchise. Even in the past, when they recast with Lazenby, they went right back to Sean as their safety net. So McClure having him just meant Cubby had to make sure the next Bond was a massive success. So Brolin was cast in the role at one point, but when they thought about it, they just realised that the movie would be going against the Connery Bond, and thought that more just made more sense. This competition also went beyond casting the lead as well. Barbara Carrera was actually approached to be Octopussy, but she turned it down to star in Never Say Never Again. Carrera said she wanted to be alongside Sean Connery, which I can imagine felt like a little gut punch to Eon. Sybil Danning was announced as being cast in Preview magazine in 1982, but she later said that she clashed with Cubby. They also initially looked at getting Faye Dunaway for the titular role. Now we'll talk about who they went with when we get to her, but it was someone who'd screen tested a lot of Bonds, including Brolin. Robert Brown was also put in the part of M. He'd pretty much taken the reins in the past under the role of Admiral Hargreaves, however technically, he's actually Miles Messervy in this film, with that being the name that was also used for Bernard Lee. Personally, I don't know, I just kind of wish they'd kept Hargreaves as the name and put M as like the code name, but they never out and out say it, so I don't think it actually matters. These days, you know, we're obviously used to there just being different M's, but the guys on the team wanted to keep the same character, and thus the same relationship. But I think you can easily, you know, just mentally do the mental gymnastics that you need to say this is the same guy from The Spy Who Loved Me, who then got hired as M. I mean, Maud Adams is playing two different characters, mate, so do what you want. Things get even more complicated come Craig's run though, as his portraits of both Lee and Brown's M in his films. But it doesn't really matter. Interestingly, George Lazenby also appeared as a character named JB in The Return of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. He drives an Aston Martin during the movie, and thus 1983 saw the first and only year where 3 Bond actors reprised their roles in some form. A fun thing that I also found out on IMDb trivia is that Cary Elwes also worked as Roger Moore's assistant on this movie, and he said every day he had to drive Roger Moore to the set, but he was very worried about killing James Bond, to the point he drove extremely slowly, and Moore even said, "You can speed up a little if you want." Didn't even sound like Moore, it sounded more like Connery there. What does matter though is how we start the film, and as always, we begin with one man walking onto screen. Now we begin with another excellent pre-title sequence that continues Moore's run of having the best ones so far. Shows Bond getting a disguise, infiltrating an army base, getting caught, and then taking the disguise in a mini-jet that's clearly building off Little Nelly. And it all comes out of horse's arse. The majority of the stunt takes place at the 311 hangar at RAF Norfolk, but the producers kept stum about where this place was supposed to be. Because of that, people have guessed it's a Latin American country, with the Castro nods making it seem like Cuba. But we can't say it for legal reasons. Bond sneaks on board the base and then switches costumes to take on the role of Toro. I've always really loved when they do the switcheroo on costumes as well, and it just brings back the white tux and Goldfinger for me. But it's just nice having it all part of the same outfit, and Cruise would clearly crib from this when Ethan escapes from the Kremlin. Just the way he swanks about onto the base as well and knocks a guy's pocket absolutely kills me, and Moore is so good at looking like he owns the place. Bond then places a bomb inside a plane, but it's at this point the real Toro arrives and sees it's a load of bull.
It's a small world. You're a Toro too.
So Bond's taken off the base, but luckily his hot partner arrives and distracts the guard so he can escape. It kind of builds off the ambulance scene in Moonraker, and though it's a bit stupid to think these guards would completely drop their attention because a woman's flashing her thighs, Moore's face absolutely kills me throughout. He's like, go on son. I love the way he uses their parachutes as well to get them off the car. No idea why they're walking around wearing them on the ground, but it creates a nice effect as they come out the back of the car. Bond then boards his mini jet, which comes out the horse carriage, which I think is such a cool reveal. Even now, you wouldn't think they'd be able to fit a plane in there, and just the way we have the fake horse arse lift up really keeps you guessing at what's going to happen. This is actually a real jet though, and it's a home-built BD-5J, which was capable of going 150 miles per hour. Bond then takes to the sky, and after a heat-seeking missile is launched hot on his tail, we get a big chase scene through the air. Now I have no idea what Bond's plan was and how he destroyed the hangar until this showed up, but I think it's a great way to use your enemy's weapons against them. We've kind of touched upon how they have kind of sanitized Bond a bit for the Moore run, and he'd gone from being this cold-blooded killer to a guy who's like, I'll only kill if I have to. Even to the point like, he shot the tires on the truck that captured him instead of shooting the soldiers. So using the missile is such a creative way to destroy the hangar, while giving us a nail-biting stunt as it flies through the hangar itself. This effect was achieved by attaching the jet to a car and then removing the roof so it was just below the frame. They also peppered lots of extras and objects throughout the hangar and angled the wings so the pole was never seen. I was kind of mind-blown learning this as well, because I knew they didn't fly the jet through it, but still, I thought like, maybe they put the brakes on it or something, mate. Yes, I am an idiot. You can kind of see the pole as he first comes in the hangar though, but beyond that, the effect's completely seamless. A miniature hangar was then constructed for the explosion, with this actually being 10 centimeters long. Think it looks great though, and though they could cut here, they then segue into a joke.
Fill her up, please.
Now cutting this was something director John Glenn contemplated, and he almost had the joke removed from the final film. However, he went to his local cinema and saw the trailer for the movie, which included the line, and after it got a laugh, he decided to keep it. It's a great way to start the movie though, and it's probably one of my favourites out the bunch. That takes us to the theme song, All Time High by Rita Coolidge. I kind of have a weird relationship with this song, and though I don't think it's an all-time low, it's also not one of those that I'm desperately in a rush to listen to. The whole thing is like the most 80s croon fest I've ever heard, and even the cover is like the most 80s image ever made. However, if it comes on in the car, it's not one I skip. So yeah, that's kind of where it sits for me, but it does bring back John Barry, who had been unable to work on the previous films. Ye old taxi reasons had meant that Bill Conti was on the previous movie, with For Your Eyes Only being for his ears only. And we're scraping the barrel of shit jokes already. But as I'm sure you can guess, they ran into a bit of a snag when crafting the song name. Octopussy was seen as a bit too blue, so they went with the completely inoffensive All-Time High. But hey, part of me wishes they just said fuck it and went with Octopussy. It would have been a more memorable song. 6 titles were actually suggested in total, but I can't actually find the others. But they pushed All-Time High along with the promotion for the film, with a lot of the posters saying Octopussy is James Bond's all-time high, which is an SEO keyword dream. They also incorporated some lines from the film itself into the lyrics.
Oh, James, we're two of a kind.
You're right. We are two of a kind.
As for Coolidge, she was suggested by Cubby's daughter Barbara, who'd go on to shepherd the franchise. Apparently he played her records non-stop until her dad finally broke down, asked who it was, and said, "That's the voice I want for the movie." From what I can gather, Coolidge's career was going through a lull, and before this video, I don't think I could have named one of her songs off the top of my head. I did go back and check out some of her other tunes, and We're All Alone sounded familiar, but she's not an artist that I've really heard talked about in the same league as some of the other singers that we've had so far. Apparently she also did a cover of Your Love Has Lifted Me Higher, Higher and Higher, which was said to have sounded similar to this song as well, but off my rendition there, I can't really hear it. This was also the second Bond song to get a music video, which is nice I suppose. As for middling as the song is, it actually killed it on the charts, with it spending 4 weeks at #1 in the American ones, though it entered the UK ones at number 75. They also ran several ads for it to be selected for an Academy Award, but unfortunately it didn't get nominated. Coolidge was apparently a bit mixed on it too, and according to the wiki, she considered the song unfinished, and though she used the overtures as part of her concerts, it was never fully used as part of her programs. However, the same trivia states that in 2006, she came out and said she was proud of being part of the James Bond family. Overall, yeah, I think it's fine, but it does feel like they're trying to recapture the feeling of Nobody Does It Better. We went through a big era where everyone was trying to make Goldfinger over and over and over and over, and now I think we've hit the era of the Nobody Does It Better remakes. But nobody does it better than Simon, and this has always kind of paled in comparison, in my opinion. The title sequence itself is by Maurice Binder, and we've got like silhouette cutouts of Moore constantly popping up. There's even a moment where lots of arms wrap around him, which evokes the poster in which Maud Adam had 8 arms wrapping around Bond while touching certain objects and plot devices. There's also a really nice roller skating guy in a tux as well, and some 007 lasers drifting across the body. Lovely. Now the film really hits the ground running after the title sequence. Though we'd usually go to MI6, we instead pick up with an agent who has made a bit of a clown of himself. That is 009, which is a number that we've heard dotted throughout the franchise. 009 first appeared as one of the agents during the briefing for Thunderball, and Bond stole the agent's DB-10 during Spectre. The guy also gets murdered here as well, and just can't catch a break. Played by Andy Bradford, he's a returning actor who played a henchman in For Your Eyes Only. As of making this video, I have seen some stuff for First Light where they talk about 009 as well, but I'm not sure if the character appears in any meaningful way. But if they do, I kinda hope they get dicked on as well. But his appearance is a very dark part of the film, with him fleeing through what I believe are the borders of the Berlin Wall, and later on we even get an appearance of Checkpoint Charlie. The wall itself was later graffitied after filming to celebrate that 007 film tier. We watch as 009 flees from the circus and then heads to some woods, and it's a scene that feels like a horror film. There's a killer that's stalking him using knives, and obviously they'd come to inspire the throwing knives in GoldenEye. Plus, it seems like he's just teleporting around the agent and ahead of him every step of the way. As we learn, it's because they're actually twins named Mishka and Grishka, but I love the way that it feels like it's supernatural. You also have like the juxtaposition of a clown with bright colors and a smiling face being chased by circus performers who are trying to stab him to death. Set at the backdrop of the Berlin Wall, just the way the balloon dangles along as well, it all adds to the scene. The twins were actually an idea from Moonraker, and with a lot of the ones that Eon come up with, they save this unused element for a feature down the line. 009 is then struck while navigating a bridge, and it's at this point he gets swept up in a river. He then washes up on the shore like something out of It. Dying, he drags himself to the British Embassy and crashes through the windows, delivering the movie's MacGuffin. And that's how you start off a mystery. As I'm sure you can guess, I think this is a fantastic way to begin the film, and I love everything about it. Whether it's the costumes, the close calls, or the fact we end with a Fabergé egg rolling out a dead clown's hand, just every element is really creative. You just wonder what's going on, and it's here that the seeds from Property of Lady are sown. I'll talk about that short more in just a bit, but the Fabergé egg is such an expensive plot device, it just instantly makes you wonder what's going on. The franchise has since been linked to the pieces, and you can actually go to the 007 store right now and pick up one for the low price of 162 grand. You what? Are you taking the mick? Look, mate, I call myself a James Bond. I'm not that much of a James Bond fan. Are people ordering this through a website? Mate, for the price of that, I'd want bloody James Bond himself to show up to the house and hand deliver it with a piece of paper that says, "You are the next James Bond." There's also an Octopussy ring that's about 15 grand if you're looking for something that's a bit more of a bargain, a bit more on the cheap side. If you really want a bargain though, mate, why not check out our merch store right below the video. There we have a whole host of James Bond inspired shirts, including our Agent 1 based off the Akira poster, our Wet Nelly 1, and also our brand new breakdown of Bond's trusty PPK. It all goes towards helping videos like this get made, and we also have a lot of big discounts for the summer and beyond. Anyway, it's here that we cut back to MI6 and see that Moneypenny's training someone new. I was actually lucky enough to see Caroline Bliss talking about her time as Moneypenny during Dalton's run at Cue the Music, and though she doesn't appear here, that was a full-on replacement, and she kind of touched upon how they were gearing towards pushing Maxwell out the door. Why I'm bringing that up is because I think you really see the seeds of it here. Penelope Smallbone was intended to be the next iteration of Moneypenny due to the feeling around Moira Maxwell. Because both were out of contract, they basically had to be secured with every new movie. So there was even the fear that this might be the pair's last film, and should they need to reboot next time, they'd need a younger Moneypenny to go with a younger Bond. As we know though, they both returned for View to a Kill, and Smallbone was kind of brushed to the side. It was around this time though that Maxwell said she'd rather be killed off than recast, but the producers refused to do it. And yeah, I can't imagine a situation in these movies where Moneypenny is murdered, but Maxwell joked behind the scenes that Smallbone was Small Bush, and she was actually named after one of the models who'd worked on the previous movies. That was Perry Small, who was a dancer on the Spy Who Loved Me's title scene, with Small being her stage name, while Smallbone was her real one. And Penelope, yeah, shorten it to Perry whatever.
What can I say, Moneypenny? Except that she is as attractive and as charming.
As I used to be?
I didn't say that.
Oh, you're such a flatterer, James.
No, Moneypenny, you know there never has been, and there never will be anybody but you.
So you've told me.
Welcome to Universal Exports.
Calvin Dyson in his review said, "Bless Lois Maxwell for actually turning up to work and going along with the scene because it's a bit demeaning having to say what everyone's thinking." Again though, she will be back for a View to a Kill, but she is out the door along with more. Bond then meets Sir Frederick Grey and M in his office, which is when we learn about 009. They've got their hands on the Fabergé egg, and though it looks good, it's actually a fake. The real one is being auctioned at Sotheby's, which is also a location that pops up in Fleming's work. It's here that things kind of segue into Property of a Lady, which is also the name of the short story in the book.
Property of a Lady.
Written by Ian Fleming in 1963, it was commissioned as a tale for the Ivory Hammer. It then appeared in Playboy in '64 when it released just a month prior to the author's death. In it, Bond sits bored in his office thinking about how there's a vacuum of stuff to do. The world seems absolutely fine, so he sits reading a paper about an assassination. Somebody's been using a toy water pistol filled with cyanide, and it's kind of just speaks to the shady and often creative side of spy work. But he is bored. Bond then gets called up to the office, and it's here where he tries to read what the mission's going to be from Moneypenny. He thinks about how sometimes she'll show a tinge of excitement if it's something big, or look worried if it's something dangerous. But here, she's difficult to read. And yet, on the surface, the mission is pretty bland. A Fabergé egg's been cleared through customs and is now being delivered to a woman who works for MI6 named Maria. According to the story, Maria's grandfather suspected that the Russian Revolution was on the horizon, and in 1917 bought the egg so he had something valuable he could exchange if situations got tight. We learn though that Maria isn't all she seems to be. She's actually a double agent who's been sent by the Soviets to spy on MI6 and send reports back and forth. However, MI6 is actually aware of this and uses her as a way to pass back false reports to mislead the Soviets. Bond is brought in to consult with the expert in M, and he figures out what it's being used for. You see kids, Peter Carl Fabergé used to bake these wonderful eggs for the Tsars, with this one being based on the Imperial coronation egg. That was crafted for the 1896 coronation of Nicholas II, and the coach we see inside is based on the one used for the coronation. The book tells us that this is apparently a missing masterpiece whose only record is a sketch drawn by Fabergé. They believe that the gift has been sent as a way for her to sell it at auction and receive a payment for her services, without them basically paying her and making it look obvious she's a spy. Because if it's an inheritance and she's getting loads of money, there's shades of doubt there. But yeah, MI6 have obviously figured it out, and they suspect her handler will be there and will bid to push up the value. They have no idea what he looks like either, and they want Bond to go and identify the target. Now, Bond correctly guesses that the egg was more than likely found in the Kremlin, and the Soviets don't really know or appreciate art, and they think of the eggs as just being fancy baubles. A lot of art is banned, yada yada yada. Fleming doesn't think much of the Russians, that kind of thing. But because of this, it's something they're willing to pass on as payment, thus they also really don't know how much it's going to sell for. So if they go to the auction, they can identify the handler and get them expelled from the country by just also pushing up the bid. Foreign KGB directors don't grow on trees, and if they're ousted, then Russia won't be able to replace the one in the UK for at least a couple of weeks. So getting them out of the country is something that's going to be fantastic in the Cold War. But yeah, Bond heads there with M specifically telling him not to bid. Do not bid on it, he says. Bond then arrives, having studied the Soviet agents' faces in the files they have, but he doesn't recognize anyone. Bond of course then bids, identifies the contact, and gets him expelled from the country. So not exactly the most thrilling story, even though it is quite a good read, but I can see how this is the sort of thing you grab to sit amongst a larger adaptation. Now, whereas the Russians were the baddies there, this isn't necessarily the case with Octopussy. Even though we were at the height of the Cold War, we see that there's still some allies in Russia. Cutting to a meeting with their military leaders, we get to meet back up with Gogol. Always good seeing him, and yeah, his smiling face just makes me want to go out and buy a bottle of vodka to salute my comrade. The Soviet chairman is here too, who's played by Paul Hardwick, with him being based upon Leonid Brezhnev. Is that right? Let me know below. But yeah, they all just love being Russian, with no one wanting to rush into war. But there's some dissent amongst the ranks. That comes from General Orlov, who's played by Steven Berkoff. Berkoff is an absolutely fantastic actor, and this role would basically get him the one in Rambo Part 2, and something else that's skipping my mind right now. Beverly Hills Cop 2. He wants to bring Mother Russia back to the height of power, but the others argue he's made a Burke off the Soviets and is embarrassing all of the country. Thank you, thank you. They don't want to start a war, whereas Orlov will do whatever he can. I think the set here is fantastic as well, and I love the spinning seats that rotate around the room. Just makes for a fantastic presentation in what could be a pretty dull boardroom scene. Feels like it's building off elements of the From Russia with Love book, where the Soviets have a similar meeting. But here, they're painted out in a much better light, as Cubby didn't really want to alienate Russia. Orlov also calls to display the Kutuzov computer, with this being a reference to Field Marshal General Kutuzov. It's here that we then cut to the auction and see Bond deliberately pushing up the bid to get one over on the movie's villain. That is Kamal Khan, who's played by Louis Jourdan. There were even some rumours that he was considered for Bond at one point, but that's never really been substantiated. He was in the running for Drax last time though, and was both a personal friend of Moore and Cubby. Cub actually suggested the part at one of Louis' parties in Beverly Hills, where apparently it went down a storm. Jourdan had played Dracula in 1977's Count Dracula, with Christopher Lee also playing him at several points in his career, making Maud Adams co-star the two Dracula actors. From what I can gather as well, Richard Maybaum also tried to get Gert Frobe to come back and play Goldfinger's brother. This is something he'd been suggesting since since Thunderball, but Frobe died just 5 years later, and thus this would be the last time the idea popped up. As for Khan, he's an exiled Afghan prince who's now up to some nefarious things. He's determined to buy the egg no matter what, and Bond wants to see just how much he's willing to pay for it. Bond just keeps pushing his buttons and bidding until Khan's forced to pay $500,000. He even asks to inspect the egg and then swaps this out with a fake one. So Khan has paid way more than he should for an egg that isn't even real. They then head outside with Bond observing him, and I appreciate that they also shot this on Bond Street. He then tells Jeremy Bulloch to follow the car, with Bulloch returning from last time. In case you missed our last video, we pointed out how he also starred in The Spy Who Loved Me as a naval officer, and on top of that, played Boba Fett in the original trilogy. Heading back to MI6, M is bloody fuming that Bond's not only been bidding, but that he snatched the real one as as well. But Bond suspects Khan won't complain that it's fake, and that will smoke him out. Bond then travels out to Khan's palace in India. I have to say they do wonders with the location, and watching the helicopter fly past places like the Taj Mahal is a sight to behold. Bond then meets with his contact Vijay, who plays a familiar tune to confirm he's an ally. No idea how they know there's a James Bond tune in this world, but I quite like the scene. As we talked about in our Dr. No breakdown as well, the Bond theme was actually repurposed from the song Bad Sign, Good Sign. This was based upon typical Indian melodies and played with instruments from the country, so it at least works with this trip to India.
I was born with this unlucky sneeze, and what is worse, I came into the world the wrong way round.
Vijay is played by real-life Vijay Amritaj, who I gather was a massive tennis player at the time, and he's now become a commentator. I'm guessing this was cameo casting, but I think the guy's great in the movie, and honestly, would have had no idea he was a professional athlete instead of an actor. Shoutouts to Mooch TV as well for reminding me he was also in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, or as I would have called it, the VJ Home. Yeah, they can't all be bangers, to be fair, the jokes can be bad as well. But they even give him a tennis racket at certain points, and he's probably the most memorable male side agent through Moore's run. Bond then goes to the hotel and notices a boat of beautiful women, which is sailing an octopus flag. Later on, we get our usual Bond gambling scene at the casino, with Khan clearing house through using a loaded die. This kind of builds off Goldfinger, who cheated at cards, and Hugo Drax in the Moonraker book, who did the same thing. In our breakdown of that film, we talked about how Drax said in the book, Bond better spend the winnings quickly, which is a line that Khan also drops as well.
Spend the money quickly.
Like those, Khan clearly doesn't need the money, but he does it to gain a sense of superiority.
How do you do it?
It's all in the wrist.
Moore gets it on the classic white tux as well, and after his entrance in India and now this, I think this might be the best dressed the actor ever was. Throughout the films, we've talked about the suits of Bond, and I think I've basically bought all of Connery's from them first 4 films. I speak to a lot of people in the community about Bond fashion, and without fail, everyone always says that Moore's suits are some of the worst. And apparently, beyond that, no one's asked Anthony Sinclair for a Dalton design. But hey, I'll hold my hands up and say that I think throughout this film that they nail a look for the actor. Except for maybe the safari suit.
Why don't you take over the major's position? Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Bond then calls double, and though he doesn't have the cash, he places the egg on the table. He also gets to one-up Khan by saying it's player's privilege to use the other player's die, and he rolls a 6-6 right off the bat. It always kills me how he doesn't even look down and just maintains eye contact throughout.
6-6. Fancy that.
It's some of the best toning that Bond's ever done, and as a scene, it just works brilliantly. It's like a condensed version of the one from Goldfinger, in that it hits all the beats, but it does it in like a quarter of the time. That also includes the introduction of the henchman in Gobinda. Whereas Oddjob came in, knocked Bond out, and then painted Jill. Now, while I would never claim that this is anywhere near as iconic as the stuff in that film, I think him crushing the die with his bare hand just works really nicely in the same vein to show this guy isn't one to be messed with, and that there will be further consequences if Bond continues. Then leads to a tuk-tuk chase throughout the streets with us seeing some additional upgrades. In the past, I have complained about the Bondler and Moonraker, but I think this actually works well without veering too far into being ridiculous, even if it is a bit stupid. Apparently, the guy who rides his bike in between the two battling tuk-tuks wasn't planned either, but they kept it in because it was just a great part of the scene. Bond gets stabbed in the chest, but it just goes through the cash he's just won, and Vijay beats up people with his racket. With the street being busy, Bond then ventures by foot, and it's kind of a checklist of an Indian street. And I just imagine Cubby being like, we need a guy who breathes fire. We need hot coals along the ground so Bond can do a firewalk. We need a guy in a bed of nails that Bond then throws a guy onto and complains that's his bed. We need a guy who's swallowing a sword and then Bond pulls the sword out and has a sword fight. It's that sort of thing. I think in anything else it would be a bit over the top, but since this is Bond's first time in India and also a Moore movie, it's not that bad. Also, love the way they escape as well by driving through a poster that's then replaced by another one, and then we go into the Q scene.
It certainly pays to advertise.
There's a guy climbing up a rope that comes out a basket from the ground, a door with spikes in it that home alones you when you pull the handle, a pen with acid in it, and a camera that relays images to a watch. Bond tries to zoom in and out to get some titillating pictures, and it's a great use of technology there, Bond. It's all kind of selling the fantasy though, and we see as it displays boobs in HD on a watch, which I imagine in the 80s was the height of technology. Look at what we can do in the future, we can zoom up close to boobies. In real life though, this display was black and white, and the watch itself was the liquid crystal TV Seiko. You had to carry around a giant receiver to get the pictures, but hey, for the time, it doesn't actually look that bad. More accurate to the movie than a lot of the Bond watches I've bought, mate. Where's my cool fucking laser shit? They also put a miniature homing device and mic into the egg, which is small enough to sit in the carriage. Now, I'm not 100% on what the tech was like back then, but I can imagine this was completely groundbreaking because the microphone was smaller than a fingernail. And I am not sure if they could do that back then, but let me know below. We then get a sort of replay of the Contessa scene from last time with Bond having dinner with Kamal's mistress. Magda has been dotted throughout the movie, and I'd actually say she's my favourite side character in the film. It's nice to get some alone time with the character, and though she kind of gets brushed to the side, she does keep popping up throughout, and it's always great seeing her.
The egg for your life.
Well, I'd heard the price of eggs was going up, but isn't that a little high?
Now, both clearly know that the other's after something that the other has, with Magda being after the egg. As for Bond, well...
What is that?
That's my little Octopussy.
Magda then steals the egg, and in what's an extremely elegant escape, we see she rolls down the balcony like a circus performer. Balletic. Bond is all in on letting her go though, and he just smugly watches her escape with the egg, which of course also has the mic in as well. And no one was like, well, that was a bit too easy, wasn't it? But they've got the egg, they're gonna leave. Bond then turns around to go back to bed, which is when he's smashed like the like button by Gobinda. It's here that we then watch as Khan goes out to meet Octopussy, and he's rowed in by a band of beautiful women. One of these is none other than Safira Afzal, who I actually hung out with at the latest 007 GB club meeting. Your boy was wining and dining, drinking martinis, and just basically being the life and soul of the party. I think Safira even said at one point I should be the next Bond, and she would know, mate. Her words, not mine. But nah, she was absolutely lovely, and I remember even going like, were you an Octopussy? And she was like, yeah, everyone was mate. So they've got these whole host of beautiful women, but Safira is by far the standout for me, and yeah, just had an absolute laugh hanging out with her. Khan is then taken to Octopussy, and I love how they kind of play with our expectations. Octopussy is framed like a villain in the movie, with her being kept out of shot and us only seeing her hands. Something that they did in the early iterations of Blofeld, and she's clearly the boss of Kamal. It's just a really nice misdirect and a cute way to toy with our expectations when we're this many movies deep. It's also something that they kind of used to beat McClurry. If you watched our breakdown of For Your Eyes Only, then you'll know we talked about how the competing studios had access to the other's ideas to make sure that they weren't stealing or using stuff that belonged to the other. We'll talk about that a bit more on Never Say Never Again, but Eon also shut down some ideas McClurry had to the point that he was only really able to remake Thunderball, even though he wanted to take Bond in other directions. But Eon were also worried that if he got a hold of their ideas, that he might make a similar film. And let's be honest, with how similar Bond movies are anyway, there was the chance they could end up making the same film. So they went with an idea that they didn't think anyone else would come up with, which was a female crime boss with a group of women who'd be marketed as the big bad. And needless to say, no one came close to copying it. Even the way they reveal her at the midpoint is similar to how they sometimes hold off the big bad until late in a film like Dr. No. Bond and Octopussy are very much equals, and I see her and Bond as being two of a kind. Now, we seem to talk about this every single breakdown, but there's always been the notion that the Bond girls are bimbos. However, you know, For Your Eyes Only definitely disproved that, and Octopussy as well is another intelligent, capable, commanding, beautiful woman who's more than a match for Bond. Now, if Maud Adams looks familiar, well, that's because she was also in The Man with the Golden Gun. There she played Andrea Anders, who was somewhat Scaramanga's mistress. Much like Charles Gray, who featured in You Only Live Twice, she was brought back in a much bigger role. This was due to how much the producers loved her, and I think she's brilliant in the role. Both director John Glenn and Moore were happy with this choice too, and weren't really bothered about the continuity. These days, we're kind of sticklers for that, but you'll see like Gemma Chan playing two different characters in the MCU. And honestly, I think she's excellent, and I'm glad they brought her back in this much bigger way. Think back then, you have to remember as well that movies weren't as readily available to watch. Home video wasn't really a big thing, and people obviously didn't have access to streaming. So I don't even know how many people in the general audience would have even have noticed unless they were big fans of the movies and watched them repeatedly. Even as a kid, I remember realizing the actress was the same, but kind of shoving it together in my head that she survived in Golden Gun, which yeah, it didn't happen, but I can totally appreciate why it didn't break people's immersion. I mean, let's be honest, every movie starts with a character walking on screen against a white, never-ending void and then turning and shooting the audience. Like, the movie starts off by breaking the fourth wall. It doesn't have Bond walking around being like, "Where am I? What's this white room? What's this that's going on?" We all understand that these are movies. The continuity is fucked. You don't need to explain why Bond looks different every couple of years and never really ages. People understand deep down that he's been recast because these are movies and it's a different actor playing the character. There is no real continuity needed. Even with all that, the fact she tested a lot of Bonds at audition just made her a natural when going back against Moore. I think out of all the women, that this is the one I could see his Bond riding off to Jamaica with, as she's sort of like Talia al Ghul, like from the comics, where she really seems like Bruce's equal, and should the pair unite, they could rule the world. The only problem is that Khan has other plans, and it's at this point that we cut to a dinner scene. These are another staple of Bond stuff, but they ramp things up by bringing in a sheep's head. It's obviously a delicacy, but also one of those things that would raise a few Roger Moore eyebrows with a man like Bond. They did something similar in Temple of Doom, and I know that got shit on at the time for how it depicted the country, so I was curious if the same thing happened here in response to the scene. Couldn't actually find that out, and Khan just goes right for the eye, with this actually being made of marzipan. Sent to bed, Bond is still on the job and he melts the bedroom bars with his pen. He then climbs along the balcony and watches Orlov coming in. Going to Magda's room, he then finally gets downstairs and eavesdrops on the meeting through the egg. Turns out they've been providing fake diamonds, which gives us a bit of an inkling about what's going on, but Magda's hairdryer messes up the audio, and after it's smashed, Khan finds the microphone. Bond then dashes to a room full of bodies and sneaks out in a bag, which I think's a really creative way to get out of the compound. I've always loved this bit, especially with how he scares the guards with him getting himself free. Safari suit is also one of those that I think hasn't aged that well, and that's something I constantly see popping up on the fashion Bond channels, like, "Get a load of this guy, what a dickhead." We then see as Khan's forces hunt the deadliest game. Man. This idea had roots in The Man with the Golden Gun, where they wanted an elephant stampede to happen during a chase. Bond and Scaramanga would ride on the back of them and race each other instead of the car chase. If you've seen or breakdown of that film, then you'll know we talked about it more there, but this was a scene that was spiritually brought across to this, with Khan riding on the back of one. Bond then has a run-in with lots of different creatures like spiders, snakes, crocodiles.
Technically, y'all, I'm an alligator.
Leeches and tigers. Oh my! Shoutouts again to Mooch TV, who pointed out that the sit gag was actually a nod to Barbara Woodhouse.
Sit.
Come on, sit. Good boy.
I know it's a common thing to do, but Woodhouse had a number of shows instructing how to train dogs, and that authoritative sit was seen worldwide. I think it also influenced that moment in Spectre as well, where Bond tells the guy to stay.
Nope, stay.
But the chase has some great dynamics, with Bond rushing before then hiding in the terrain, and then unbuckling the elephant's seat to rush amongst the trees again. We then go to what's another low point for Moore, with Bond swinging through the trees howling like he's Tarzan.
George not feels so good.
Now, I know it's one of those moments that fans absolutely hate, but I'm gonna be honest, mate, never minded it. I obviously grew up with it as a kid, so, you know, it's always just been part of the film for me. And to be fair, if you think it sucks, I can totally see why, but I don't mind it. I also love Bond's cheeky escape on the tourist boat, as he knows that Khan won't pursue them.
Mr. Bond is indeed a very rare breed, soon to be made extinct.
And I have to say, Jordan is probably the most underrated villain in Bond history. Guy gets some of the best lines in the series and does it all without like a gammy leg or a big scar across his face. And he's still killing it. We then go back to Q Labs and see Bond has done a cracking job there drawing that tattoo. Fuck the spy shit, mate. You could be a professional artist with that shit.
I hear that island's full of beautiful women. No men allowed.
Really? Sexual discrimination.
Yeah, mate, you bloody tell him, mate. I'm sick of these double standards. That then takes us to Bond infiltrating Octopussy's floating island in what's one of the best disguises that Bond's ever had. Goldfinger gave us the bird on the head as he snuck in at the base at the start, but here we've got a full-on crocodile sub. Just the way the mouth lifts up as he has a look around, I think as a kid, this is the point where I was like, mate, this is the best movie ever made. What do you mean Rotten Tomatoes says it's terrible? Bond then makes his way to Octopussy, past all the beautiful guards, and we see an island that seems like heaven. And what I feel is another callback to Goldfinger, we see is they're basically an all-female gang. In the book, Pussy had a group known as the Cement Mixers that was made up solely of women. They smuggled, had skills to pay the bills, and I think they kind of acted as the basis for this. So yeah, Bond then comes across Octopussy, who's wearing a silk robe that you could get on the 007 store for $1,000 before it completely sold out. It's here that we kind of then segue into the short story of Octopussy. In the film, the character tells the story about her father and how Bond basically gave him an honourable death. Octopussy recounts how Bond showed him mercy, and the tale is what happened in the short.
You remember Major Dexter Smythe? You were sent out to arrest him, weren't you?
In it, we learn that Major Dexter Smythe stole a cache of Nazi gold during the Second World War. Smythe worked as part of the war effort and was instructed to read through documents detailing their earnings. So here, he discovered they had a cache of gold hidden up a mountain. He then took the money and bought this place in Jamaica where he's since been lying low and enjoying the quiet life. The story basically opens with the artwork that you can see here, with him out in the ocean looking at a local octopus. That is a fish that we'll talk about in a bit, but yeah, he's basically trying to tame the octopus that he's found out there. He contemplates reaching his hand out to see if it will shake it, but holds himself back because he knows that it's dangerous. But this is pulled from Fleming's real life as well, as he actually had a pet octopus called Pussy. This was given to him by neighbour and sometimes lover Blanche Blackwell, who it said inspired Pussy galore. He also thinks about the most dangerous creature on the island, which is the scorpion fish that I've just closed the book on. But that's the only thing he kills on sight, as he thinks the other fish are his friends. The Major also suffers from failing health, and with this being around the time of Fleming's death, it's hard not to see the similarities. They even have a bit where he's been instructed by a doctor that he's only allowed 10 cigarettes a day and 2 whiskeys. He's that ill, mate. Get yourself healthy and only have 10 cigarettes. But yeah, knowing Fleming died in his 50s after decades and decades of drinking and smoking, I'm guessing that this was an instruction he received as well. And yeah, health advice in the 60s was a lot different. Anyway, in it we learn that the Major went up a mountain with an expert climber named Franz Oberhauser. Smythe arrived and to his weeping family told him that he was going off for an interrogation after suspecting he was a Nazi. In reality though, he basically made him take him up the mountain, and when he took him to the spot, he shot him in cold blood. Franz then fell off the edge of the cliff and his body was buried under the ice. It seemed like he'd been completely lost and forgotten about, but set ice unthawed 15 years later, and since then, the authorities have been on the hunt for Smythe. Now if the name Franz Oberhauser sounds familiar, well that's because it's the name of Blofeld's father in the Craig run. In Spectre, we learn that after Bond's parents died, that Franz took him in. However, he was killed by his son during a climb, much like the Major in the story. The kid then went on to become Blofeld, and I remember reading Octopussy for the first time last year and appreciating how all the bits fell into place. Now obviously Fleming didn't have that plan now, and instead Oberhauser is just someone who looked after Bond. There's a great line in the book where Smythe basically asks how Bond knew him, and Bond says Franz was a father when he needed one. So this mission is personal. Smythe is an absolute bastard though, and he justifies the murder as being just one more amongst the millions of Germans and Austrians who died on the enemy's side. The audiobook is actually narrated by Tom Hiddleston, and if you thought he'd be a great Bond after The Night Manager, then I really recommend checking it out. Smythe's also a complex character who married a woman named Mary from the service, and their riches afforded them a fabulous life. But over time, they drifted apart, and Dexter's drinking and drugs caused friction between the pair. Mary took an overdose to basically be like, I'll show you, and though she tried to do it without killing herself, the problem is she did.
Well, nobody's perfect.
So it's been a bit miserable. Anyway, Bond's sent there to bring him in, and Smythe recounts the story. Bond says the authorities will come to arrest him soon after he writes his report, and clearly gives him an out. In the movie, we learn he's took his own life in an honourable way, rather than having to deal with the consequences, which Octopussy appreciates. However, in the book, he goes out to a party, returns home drunk, and then goes looking for a scorpion fish to give Octopussy its lunch. Drifting in the waters, he then thinks about the options he has and how he can run, go out in a blaze of glory, or even fall on his sword. He imagines himself stood in the dock in military uniform saying how he was just a poor soldier who wanted to make a life for himself. But all of a sudden, the scorpion fish stings him, and he knows that he's in pretty deep water, like metaphorically as well. He's got 15 minutes left of agony, and though he could go to the shore to get drugs, it'll take the doctor an hour at least to arrive this late. So he insists that Octopussy gets its lunch and wants to go and give it its last meal. He then reaches out to shake its hand, thinking how amazing it is when it reaches out back, but it then just grabs him. He's hit with a terrible realization that it's pulling him in, and it drags him under the water. Now, I've always read it as being extremely similar to the betrayal of Oberhauser, and how he betrayed him to get what he wanted, and now the octopus is doing the same thing. The story ends by saying it's a bizarre and pathetic end to a once valuable officer, and though it's reported it was an accidental drowning, Bond suspects that wasn't really the case. For the movie though, it's a cache of royal gold from North Korea where he killed the guide. Either way, that's the basis of the story, and you'll never look at an octopus or a pussy in the same way again. Khan then arrives in a Nauru jacket, much like we've seen with villains like Blofeld and Dr. No. He clearly sees that Octopussy and Bond are close, and that he's gonna have to take matters into his own hands.
You have a nasty habit of surviving.
Well, you know what they say about the fittest?
Anyway, Bond and Octopussy get it on. Now Khan goes to some hitmen, including a guy with a killer yo-yo.
You don't want to make enemies with the woman.
It always killed me a bit, this bit. The yo-yo guy is a great little henchman that I think is even more memorable than Gobinder. Like, he yo-yos that great looking photo of Moore to death. He means business. This is also shown by the fact it's these guys who kill VJ. Gobinder needs help from the yo-yo guy and he can't do shit, whereas these guys just get the first allied body of the movie. They aren't messing around, and it really just adds some stakes to the film to have a character die this way. Also, that cut to the birds is absolutely superb. I always remember watching the scene right before this and how Q had been watching all day and he was the one who switched shifts with BJ. It could have almost been Q. I always remember that stressing me out as a kid, and whew, that would have been a big one. Meanwhile, Bond is looking around his quarters and he finds a leaflet for the circus. Octopussy's going for a business trip to Europe, and he also tempts Bond with joining her.
I'm not for hire.
I really appreciate these moments, as even though Bond could have everything, he still has a duty to the job. Octopussy then flips out because he'll do everything for Queen and Country, but not for her. So Bond does the old force himself on her and kiss her until she likes it. Which, I don't know if that you should be doing that. You might also notice that the bed is shaped like an octopus, which was designed by Peter Lamont. We also cut to the chandelier above. According to the production notes, this was holding the diamonds that Octopussy later wants to smuggle, which becomes a pivotal plot point. The assassins then go to kill Bond as he's going down on Pussy. Sorry, worded that terribly there. But they go to kill him in a scene that's clearly playing off the death of Aki in You Only Live Twice. In case you missed our breakdown of that, Aki was poisoned from the ceiling in a move that was meant for Bond. This was based off the assassination attempt on a real-life Japanese emperor, and it then got brought into the movie. The assassin here tries a similar thing, but Bond and Octopussy get out the way. And while this is going on, I'm thinking, like, nothing is easier than just walking up to them and shooting them with a gun.
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. I'll come back down here, boom, I'll blow their brains out.
You do not need a fucking killer yo-yo. But the bed's sliced up and it leads to a fight in which Bond and Octopussy work together. There's just really good choreography to it, and I love the moment when Octopussy steps on the hitman as they're escaping. Bond also feeds a hitman to an octopus, much like the short story. According to IMDb trivia, the blue-ringed octopus is one of the most venomous creatures on Earth, with it producing tetrodotoxin, which is also found in pufferfish. And I nailed that pronunciation there. Just as little as 1 milligram can kill you though, and there's no antidote for the poison. Bond then tussles with the last dude and the pair tumble out the window. They land in those crocodile-infested waters, which we were told were extremely deadly. Now, I kinda skipped over it, but that's why Bond had to infiltrate the island in a crocodile suit. The waters are filled with predators, including Bond now, and they said that going in that suit was the only way to get there. However, the assassins just snuck in through said waters without any slick suits, and they were absolutely fine. But now they're getting torn apart. Anyway, everyone thinks that Bond is dead, but he manages to sneak off back in his crocodile suit. Driving through Berlin, they then pass through the American sector, and Bond is gonna have to be careful with what he does next.
Remember, 007, you're on your own.
Well, thank you, sir. That's a great comfort.
Heading to Octopussy Circus, we see Mishka and Grishka, along with Bond eavesdropping the meeting between Orlov, Gogol, Khan and Octopussy. Bond ain't really that subtle at first though, and he kinda just walks around the circus trying to avoid the baddies. But yeah mate, maybe don't sit right in front of everyone's view and shit. Now, Mooch TV pointed out that the woman that we see doing backflips is actually ex-gymnast Susan Dando, who became a TV presenter around the time. She did a lot of work on this film too, and basically helped to choreograph the gymnastic scenes. Bond then does start to sneak as he climbs onto a train underneath the carriage, and there's lots of cool moments as he uncovers the plan. Octopussy believes she'll be smuggling diamonds, whereas Bond learns they've been replaced with an atomic bomb. This will be detonated at a US Air Force base in West Germany. Now, due to this being at a US base, it is believed that the world will assume that this was accidental with one of their own nukes going off. Thus, the world will call for disarmament, which will weaken their military might. However, Russia won't agree to this, and therefore they'll be able to just invade Europe unimpeded by the continent's atomic weapons. Mutually assured destruction then goes out the window, and the Soviets will rule over all. Which is a pretty wild way to take things since we started with a Fabergé egg, but hey, I appreciate how the plot works really well. Trying to get to the bomb, Bond's caught by one of the twins, and he gets the upper hand by using the cannon. Stuffing his body inside, he then goes along in the ride. Huge shout out to Dutch Bond fan as well for pointing out that the customs guy even checks the cannon later, but he's either shit at his job or they just forgot about it when making the movie. Or maybe his body just disintegrated like they do in GoldenEye. He also pointed out how pissed off Bond is that they're placing an explosive at a military base when the movie literally opens with him placing an explosive at a military base. It isn't a nuke, to be fair, but I'm sure a lot of regular Joes who work there who are fixing up planes died, so you could have your stunt in your mini jet. You sick bastard! Olaf then comes in to see how things are going, and it's here Bond pulls his gun and berates the baddie. However, Olaf is saved by the arrival of a soldier. Now, I always kind of felt bad for this guy, because he's just going about his rounds, opens the door, and then Bond just shoots him right in the head. And the guy's got no chance to react. Just his face as well. The poor lad never knew what hit him. Dead at 22 because of bloody James Bond.
What? Oh my God. Thanks for calling.
Then leads to a big action scene with Bond headshotting soldiers left and right and racing after Olaf. Bond also flips his car onto two wheels, which feels very akin to Diamonds Are Forever. We also get a great moment where the tyres burst and he then mounts the rails and drives it down the track. You do kind of have to turn your brain off, but it's a really creative way for him to catch up to the train. Bond then jumps on board said train and runs along the top while a car is hit by an oncoming train and it then goes flying into a boat. And hey mate, that was a very close call that, like the guy just barely moved out the way. Bond then gets on board the train and dresses up in a gorilla suit in what's another quick change scene. While this is going on, Gogol then finds the diamonds in Olaf's truck, and thus Russia realise he's betrayed them. Olaf's demise is also one of those villain deaths I don't think I'll ever forget. We watch as he desperately chases after the train before being gunned down by his own side. It's just something that sticks with you as he gets shot and then grabs onto it and even holds onto it as it pulls him along, but ultimately he lets go, having failed to make it. We then watch as he refuses to give up and even then continues to crawl, clearly still holding on to his hopes. But Gogol arrives and shuts it all down and slams this once great figure of his homeland.
Common thief. The disgrace to the uniform.
Which I also feel was referenced in GoldenEye.
Nothing more than a common thief.
Now you can think that's a reach all you want, mate. I can bloody hear you saying that behind the screen. But both this and the train scene in GoldenEye were shot at the same location. That is the Nene Valley Railway beside Peterborough, and I just feel like they were referencing that moment in that movie. Chillingly, in his dying breath, Olaf then says tomorrow he'll be seen as a hero, and Gogol looks at the train, wondering what he meant. On board it, Bond then watches as they set the timer, and then Gobinda hears something coming from the suit. And I tell you mate, Bond must be a magician, because the guy gets out of that suit in a split second. He then heads on top of the train, which is a great scene, and I love how we start with there immediately being a bridge that almost takes him out. He then shimmies along the side, and apparently stuntman Martin Grace rammed into a pylon during this moment. Though he recovered, he apparently spent months in hospital. Getting to Octopussy's carriage, Khan then comes in and shoots at Bond, which leads to him running back to the circus carriage. Fighting Gobinda, he's then sent over the edge, which is when he's chased by the last twin, but Bond gets the upper hand and sticks a knife in the character's back in the same way that 009 was killed earlier.
And that's for 009.
But the bomb is still out in the wild, and thus Bomb has to make a trip to the airbase. He almost gets in some teenager's car with them, slowing down and then just driving off laughing as he gets close. And at this point, mate, I would have been like, sod you. Enjoy your fucking 1000 gigawatt sunburn or whatever they say in Terminator. It wasn't a gigawatt, I know that. I can't be asked to Google it. Who does pick him up though is a comedically laughable German couple who try and feed him a sausage. He then tries to make a call, but a woman holds up the phone booth, so he then steals her car, which I completely agree with. Racing through the streets in an Alfa Romeo, we then see as Khan says his goodbyes. The two military guys here are also both actors from Star Wars as well, with the guy on the right being who Vader choked in A New Hope. Guy on the left is from the Hoth base in Empire, and he's the lad who's like, oh, it's a shame to lose your Han Solo, you're the fucking best after Bond. They then leave and nearly shit themselves when the car doesn't start. And we've all been there, mate. I love the way Bond then crosses paths with Khan and Govinda in a kind of Umbrella Academy car moment. There's then like a moment's hesitation over whether they should try and stop him. But ultimately, Khan's hubris makes them continue their plan because they don't believe there's a way Bond can stop it. Speeding through the base, he then goes into a caravan and comes out in clown makeup. Like super fast transformation that, mate. Like some stars in their eyes type shit that. Just kills me thinking there's an atomic bomb with a ticking clock next door and Bond's in a rush to stop it, but he's got to make sure the makeup is spot on. I suppose he did do it super quick to be fair, but I feel like you could have used that 30 seconds for something else. Bond then rushes inside and we have the audience laughing along like it's part of the act, and there's just some crazy clown rambling about how there's a nuke. But Moore really pulls it off, and even with the clown makeup, you can see the severity in his face. Guy eventually strips the nose and mask off and shows Octopussy who he is, and it's with this they allow him to try and deactivate the bomb. The troops then rush in, and the circus performers defend Bond, but the army eventually restrain him. So Octopussy shoots it, and thus reveals Bond's telling the truth, and therefore the agent steps in to disarm it. At 1 second remaining. Now that was pretty fucking close, mate, and part of me wonders, like, if Bond hadn't have just spent so long putting the makeup on, had he had a bit more time. But he made sure it was right, and he spent just the right amount of time on it, and thank God he did, because yes, 1 second remaining. But yeah, Octopussy knows that Khan betrayed her, and it's here that we head back to India.
Where was Kamal going? Back to India.
We then watch as Octopussy and her gang infiltrate Khan's kingdom. They use their sexy six-packs and skimpy outfits to distract the guards, their acrobat skills to climb the walls, and their ability to hit the thumbs up to beat the bad guys. Octopussy is then raced up to Khan's room where he tries to convince her he was never gonna kill her. He then offers her some cash molds which distract her, and they then take her hostage. Q also gets to take part in a climax for the first time as well, with both him and Bond taking to the sky in a hot air balloon. Now, we have debated whether Moore was too old to play Bond at this point, and I don't know if having him come in a hot air balloon with Q while the ladies do all the ass kicking defends him being cast very well. But I do kind of feel like the producers knew that too, and this is why it's the women who do the work rather than Bond at this point.
I trust you can handle this contraption, Q.
It goes by hot air.
Oh, then you can.
I do think as well it's just a really fun way to have them sneak into the base silently, and inside Bond makes his move. He takes cover on top of a tiger rug, which was actually meant to be the one he encountered in the jungle. I actually get a lot of On Her Majesty's Secret Service vibes, and you might remember there that Bond slid along some ice on his stomach while shooting people. Bond does do something similar down a banister, and he slides down it while shooting. Seen people complain about this, but I actually quite like it, especially when he has to knock the end off it so it doesn't smash into his balls. Khan and Govinda then grab Octopussy and race off to a plane with Bond chasing behind them on horseback. Bloody Q though, he stays behind and gets serenaded by the ladies. Go on, my son. The leap from the horse to the plane was also performed by Norman Howell, who'd been working as a writer on film since he was 14. This was in The Cowboys from 1972, which starred John Wayne, and this is something that he just makes look easy. We then get into what's an absolutely cracking finale with Bond climbing on board a plane as it takes to the sky. It does all sorts of maneuvers and goes upside down, but Bond basically acts like the gremlin from Terror at 37,000 feet. There's something on the wing! Govinda's then instructed to go out and get him, and I always love the look where he's like, oh, come on boss, do I have to? And at this point, mate, you should quit your job. It's a really outstanding scene though, and dare I say, one of the best stunts in Bond history. It even holds up today, and in the times of CGI and green screen, it's nice to see that stuntmen were willing to go all out like this to entertain us. Because right now, Tom Cruise seems to be the only one willing to do it. But Bond takes out Govinda, and he and Octopussy dive onto a nearby mountain while Khan crashes the plane. Octopussy then rolls off the side of a cliff with Bond just managing to save her. But the world is safe again, and it's at this point that we cut to Gogol, M and Frederick Grey. The Russians are denying any involvement, and the British also say that they're gonna return the egg. And they all have a little drink, mate. Here, here! On Octopussy's bow, we then watch as Bond goes in and out as the rowers go
In, out, in, out.
Hey, because of sex. It's because of sex. Now, if we'd ended Moore's run here with him riding off with Octopussy to go and join her empire, I wouldn't have complained. I actually feel like that's a really fitting way to end Moore's version of the character, but he comes back next time, and I do have some feelings about that movie. But yeah, that is obviously A View to a Kill, and we then get the last time we'll ever see the reveal of the next Bond title in the credits. Here it says From A View to a Kill though, but obviously they dropped the from, and technically we have another Bond film that's coming next time. Now, these credits in general, I do kind of miss that they used to announce the title and just give us a bit of excitement for what was coming next time. Unfortunately though, they'd pretty much exhausted the source material at this point and weren't really confident about where things were going to go next. Though we would get some stuff that pulled from Fleming's works like The Living Daylight, they weren't really digging their heels into what was going to come next time. And they just couldn't announce the title now without really knowing what was happening, or if there was even going to be a Bond after McClurry's picture. We also almost got our first Bond video game with James Bond as seen in Octopussy, which was the real title. Developed by Capcom, it was going to come out on the Atari system and Commodore 64. However, it never got released and no screenshots were posted into the wild. It wasn't until View to a Kill that players got to be Bond. So, I am joined by Elma from the Dress to Kill podcast. We've had you on the show before. We were talking Octopussy privately about the silk robe in it, and I just thought, get Elma on. She knows about this stuff, because this is one of those films that have been like, who the hell am I going to ask? But you are the perfect candidate for it. In case you guys don't know, Dress to Kill basically covers all of the fashion, especially female fashion, in these action films, and James Bond films especially. You can see her lovely vinyl collection behind her. But I thought I'd just get you on to talk about Octopussy, because it is the first big female-centric Bond film where Octopussy is taking up the title of the film. So, we always ask first off, do you remember the first time you saw it? Not many people do, but you might.
No, I don't remember the first time I saw it. You know, we had the DVD collection. I think I have like the 20 disc collection or something. I had it when we were like kids. First, it was the VHSs, and they would come in like these 3-packs. And to be honest, they're all a blur for me. So I remember watching like A View to a Kill thinking like, oh, I thought that was like a Sean Connery thing, and then it was not. And when you're older, so it's all a blur. But I remember like certain moments about it, and I just remember when I was a kid watching it, the colorfulness of Octopussy was really striking to me. And so yeah, that's a big part of like my memory, seeing how beautiful the colors.
A lot of the women really stand out in this, like Magda when she does the twirl off the balcony in her big long
iconic
thing. What are your favorite fashion moments of the film?
That is the one. Like I wrote down when I was watching it last night, and I wrote down what are like the iconic moments in this, you know, and if you just close your eyes and think about it, balcony scene, that stunt where she just, and also the line leading into it is great.
Actions speak louder than words.
You're so right.
He leans in to kiss her and she just goes whoop, and like flies off the balcony. It's such a good, cool moment for a girl. And then to see how she just gracefully unravels, I thought that was one of the coolest stunts actually in the entire franchise. And then everything's ready for her. She has the egg. Kamal Khan hands her the robe, and she just escapes gracefully. And then like the intro sequence, the cold open with the when you first see Bond and he tears off that yellow, the dicky, the yellow turtleneck, and then he like flips his outfit and he's a general. I loved cool, sneaky spy disguises like that when I was a kid.
I think it is probably the best cold open that we've had so far. Spy Who Loved Me has a special place in my heart, but it has the big submarine bit at the start that I kind of erased from my memory as being part of the opening sequence. Whereas this is just, they realized just cut that kind of shit out, just go straight to the stunt, and we start off with the big scene with the mini jet at the Cuban airbase. I want to say Cuba. They keep it nondescript. But you've also got the woman there, the sidekick, who's kind of like in a big white, almost timeless kind of dress. I mean, you could easily wear that now and get away with it, and you'd look great in it.
I think a lot of the outfits in this you could still wear. I mean, a lot of it is in India, so they're in traditional garb for the most part. I felt like it was really, like, compared to the previous Bond films, and then the ones after this one, like A View to a Kill, it feels very timeless. And when you look at, like, in the collection of the Bond movies, how you can take a 60s one, a 70s one, and feel like, oh, that's really a time capsule of what the fashion was like of the time and, like, what the music was like and the vibe. This one, I feel like, kind of melts away all of those 80s tropes, and the score is very classic, and all of his outfits are quite conservative, and no like oversized lapels or boxy shoulders or anything like that.
Oh, thank you.
And even the women, you get like the red spandex unitards that Octopussy's acrobatic ladies are wearing. So that's maybe like the one bit that you're like, oh, this feels of that time. But everything else is so timeless.
I'm so glad you said that about Moore as well, because when I was doing the breakdown, I've already recorded this, but I said that I think this movie is the film where Moore's suits are the best, other than the jungle chase outfit. But I think the white tuxedo, especially when he arrives in India, this is all his best stuff. Whereas even a couple of years prior in For Your Eyes Only, I feel like the fashion there is quite dated. But I don't know if they kind of looked at this as being like almost a global journey and going across the entire world. And rather than kind of trying to nail down what was the fashion at the time, they looked at it like a big expansive thing across a number of different countries and stuff. Whereas, in the past, they'd kind of kept things in certain areas, like you start off in England and then go to Egypt and then kind of stay around that area and go to Atlantis and stuff for The Spy Who Loved Me. And then Moonraker is obviously in space and stuff. So I do feel like it's got almost that worldly feel to it. And especially with India not being discovered in a Bond film up until this point, it's kind of like an introduction to it in the same way that You Only Live Twice was to Japan, and a lot of the stuff there feels timeless because it's not overplayed throughout the franchise, and therefore you don't see it date with every single film because you're like, well, I can't look back at 3 films ago and see what the style of that country was like back then. So I just think that works really well. In regards to the film in general, what are your feelings towards it? Because this is one of the most hated going by Rotten Tomatoes.
I know, that's so sad because I was like, I had so much fun watching this yesterday. It doesn't make me laugh as much as like A View to a Kill or like Diamonds Are Forever. I think those like really turn up the camp, and like I'm laughing at it, but it's so enjoyable. This one is enjoyable in a different way. Like I think there's a lot of great action beats, and like right from the start, you have like a Fabergé egg heist. It's so like Bond doing sneaky stuff. And then you see Magda do her stunt, and then you're introduced to Octopussy, and she has her own girl gang basically of like circus trained smuggling ring. And it flows, it feels fun. And the set pieces, like using India really as a character of the film is so enjoyable. Like I think, and then another iconic moment I thought was the backgammon scene.
It's all in the wrist. Double sixes.
I think what the film does really well is that it starts off with a Fabergé egg being stolen and builds up naturally to be like this atomic bomb plot happening in the middle of the Cold War. And it doesn't necessarily feel like they skip a bit along the way. It all makes sense how they do it. But if you said the starting point was here and the end point's here, you'd kind of wonder how they're going to get to it. But they just handle it all perfectly. And for me, it is Moore's second best film after The Spy Who Loved Me. I'm really shocked at how much it gets hated on. I think even in terms of, modern eyes, it holds up really well. You show these movies like For Your Eyes Only, Melina's absolutely fantastic in that as a love interest. Very complex, three-dimensional character. And Octopussy is as well. The way they frame her as just having her hands at first, when Khan's talking to her, very, very Blofeld. And she's kind of set up almost as the villain. But she feels like Moore's match in this. But I think they could have ended here with Moore going off with Octopussy and basically taking part of the smuggling ring around the world.
In an all-time high. Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, like the villain, kind of the villain, her reveal, I think is wonderful. Yeah. But you're right, like she does come like halfway through the film, so it feels like, Magda's more the main character.
That's my little Octopussy.
But I think the ensemble cast is great. Like, I think there's like this many villains. There's so many, it feels like there's a bunch of villains, like the 2 henchmen, Gobinda, so Mishka Grishka, Gobinda, and then Kamal
Yo-Yo
Khan,
guy.
Orlov, Yo-Yo guy, yeah. all of that.
Yeah.
And while like, I don't know, it doesn't feel like there's a really strong villain at all of it together is really fun. I don't know how Roger Moore fit into Mishka's outfit, but you know.
There's a lot of quick changes in this film. I mean, he goes into the outfit, and then he goes into the gorilla costume, and then he's out of the gorilla costume in like the space of a second. Then he gets in the clown costume. He's a quick change artist, this guy.
I'm a British agent. What?
Around the time, we obviously had the Battle of the Bonds, the same year, Never Say Never Again released. What are your feelings about Moore in general? Because they did cast James Brolin in the role, and then the whole thing with Never Say Never Again happened, and Eon were like, well, we're not taking a chance against Sean Connery's Bond. So what are your feelings around Moore himself in this, and do you want to give us some feelings about Never Say Never Again? I've kind of dropped this on you, but if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
Absolutely. I think Never Say Never Again is another fun movie, but for that campiness. That is one that I feel is really 80s. Like compared to this one, and so Octopussy and Never Say Never Again coming out within the same year, they feel like worlds apart. I think Octopussy is so classic and feels old worldly, and it's just, timeless. Whereas Never Say Never Again really leaned into all of the dated fashion, which is so fun to watch now, but it's another beast. And then in terms of the James Brolin stuff, I am so glad they went back to Roger Moore, because I know like he even says like, oh, we didn't know if we would do like an American accent. And I think the producer's instincts was to keep him just doing an American accent, like for the test screenings and stuff. But I don't know how that would have, like, I'm happy they made a decision about the legacy of like, okay, maybe Bond should be British, and kept it that way if they started kind of. And then that's like such a big talking point right now. It's like, James Bond has to be a British actor and stuff like that. At this point, Roger Moore has been Bond for 10 years, and I feel like he's really comfortable in the role. I really like his performance in this, and he's just the ultimate gentleman. So I really like that they kept him on. He is Bond at this point. Like, Roger Moore is synonymous with Bond. You know, like the plot of the atomic bomb and all of that stuff. Like, I don't really pay attention to that, and I think that's like what most people's issues are, is like with the plot of the film. But I think it's just visually so fun that I don't even care, and I'm just like sucked into the whole vibe of it's a vibes movie. In terms of like other fashion moments, the only things that I noticed that were kind of more like that 80s is how high the men's heels are. Like, I think Kamal Khan and Roger Moore in like the gun barrel sequence, you can see like they got these high heels on. And then you briefly mentioned that Octopussy robe, which is iconic, but I wouldn't say it's like the prettiest robe. I think we talked about it on our podcast too. We're like, why that robe?
It's just that octopus design in general. It's kind of like such a strange looking octopus.
It's strange.
Where it's gold and blue.
I actually really love the use of her, like the evening clothes, like the nightwear that she wears. Like she has silk pajamas with like lace, and Magda also has like a silk slips that she wears that's really beautiful, lots of lace. And overall, I think Roger Moore's outfits are beautiful. I think that he looks perfectly gentlemanly and tailored for like the setting. Visually, you also have like some of the weirdest moments of him wearing the clown suit, but you know, he was in disguise, so he's forgiven. The women in Octopussy's lair, I love how they use like bits of their costume to like take out some guys. Like Magda rips off her skirt that has all the beading on it, and then she like hits a dude with it when they're overtaking in the palace. And I think all of the girls' outfits are stunning. So many textures and colors, and I think the costume designer Emma Porteous did an awesome job on this, and she remains to be like the costume designer for the next 2 films, so 3 films in a row, which I thought was great. You know, they didn't really do that often with the costume designers, like keeping them on until her. And then also Lindy Hemming through the Brosnan era. I think she did all of Brosnan's movies.
Thank you for joining me to talk about it. It's been great catching up with you. Are you doing another Dress to Kill episode soon?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, we're going to come back with new episodes in the summer. And Alana and I have been planning episodes, thinking about what movies we're going to talk about, and new format. So stay tuned. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Dress to Kill. We'll be back very soon.
Awesome. Now, as for my review, when it comes to Octopussy, I think you lot's so fussy, eh? Because a lot of people don't like it. I actually don't mind it at all, and I have lots of fun when we're watching the movie. This also couples together a lot of great elements from the book, but I think it takes it beyond that. Tonally, this is more in line with what I expect from Roger Moore, and it's got lots of really memorable elements. It also has what I think is one of the best Bond girls of all time, and someone who seems to often be forgotten. But she deserves a spot near the top, especially with the movie being named after her. Overall, I love the stunts, location, wit, and just the general feel of the film. Though it isn't Moore's best, I think he's clearly enjoying it, and yeah, something must have pulled him back because he was on his way out. As for where it ranks though, you know, I obviously don't think it's an incredible must-see Bond movie that you go and tell your friends about. Also, don't think it's one of those I'll constantly go back to. However, if it's on TV, you know, and I happen to put it on the channel, then yeah, I think it's something that I'd still definitely sit and watch. It's definitely one of the upper ones with Moore for me, and that's why I'm sitting it here. Now, the film was made for $27 million and it went on to gross 187. So still pretty successful, but definitely a step down in terms of what had come before. It of course also got caught up in the Battle of the Bonds, which is where we're going to go for our next video. Yes, I've seen the comments, mate, and I'd never say never to breaking down Connery's return again. Anyway, I hope to see you over there, and thank you for checking out the video. Like, in general, this is our 14th Bond breakdown, and I just want to give you guys a massive thank you for all your support. There's been some dark times where I've thought about giving up, but you guys have really pushed me on. This has taken up nearly a year and a half of my life now, but you guys always being there really means a lot. Please drop a like on the video, and if you want to follow us on Instagram, then make sure you check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Did you know as well that members of the channel also get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. All helps videos like this get made, and huge thank you to everyone who supported us. We really appreciate it. And if you want something else to watch, we've got a breakdown on screen right now. With that out of the way though, thank you for sticking through this one. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.